Ghana, Part 2. Yes, the volunteers were an interesting group. There was J and R in a village not far away from me, Jirapa, or Jirapa. They were both English. J was a great type, really, energetic, practical, but an easygoing female with a great sense of humor. Later, after we came back from Ghana, she actually came to visit me in Ireland after I had returned there. I used to go to Jarapa and stay there for a break from Wa. R was a dour Liverpudlian with a sense of humour which appealed to me. We used to amuse ourselves and everyone else by mimicking the local accents. We Ghanaians, we are so corrupt. Polly W. was also in Jarapa. She was a Londoner. And Heather E. from Toronto, with her 5-year-old daughter, was also in Jarapa. My own two companions were each interesting in very different ways. A, my housemate in the first year, was really a misfit in a way. I don't think he was really suited to being a volunteer. He was rather prim and proper, and I think he disapproved of his rather uncouth Irish housemate. But he was too polite to say so. I don't think he ever really relaxed and enjoyed Ghana. He wasn't popular with the locals. I remember one night on the campus, he got fed up with the noise in the next bungalow. It was classic. Africans live with noise. Chickens, voices, radios punctuate the darkness at night. It's never quiet. I used to put cotton wool in my ears. But one night, A couldn't stand it any longer, and he went across to the next bungalow and asked them to turn off the radio. He was never forgiven, I think, for doing that. I loved the friendliness of the people, and I trusted them in a way I couldn't trust my own people, the Irish or the English. I would even deliberately leave the door of my bungalow open when I went out. I was tempting fate. It was almost as if I I was determined that this was going to be paradise for me. And in paradise, there were no locked doors. It was, of course, a stupid and irresponsible act, which A quite rightly took exception to. He didn't want his belongings stolen. This attitude of tempting fate has persisted with me. It's almost as if I wanted to force the world to be a paradise, the way that I wanted it to be. This anecdote gives you an idea of just how idealistic I was in those days. Very soon after my arrival in Wa, I got sick, of course. In fact, I think I was sick before I even arrived in Wa. I would get these awful stomach cramps, gripes, they're called in English, and I would have to take to my bed in a sweat for a whole day or maybe a day and a half. The next day I would go back to work, although not fully recovered. As the months wore on, the attacks became longer and more severe. The missionaries thought it was amoebic dysentery, and they recommended a vicious drug called flagyl. I followed their instructions and took 3 a day after eating. They almost made me dizzy and I was nauseous, but they did no good at all, and the attacks kept coming. One day I cycled down to the mission to see Mick G, who was training to be a Catholic priest. After a coffee, I told him I wasn't feeling well, and off I went to the toilet. The next thing I remember is being pulled off the floor and out of the toilet by Mick, with my pants still around my ankles. He was laughing. I had fainted with the pain of the stomach cramps. Anyway, I decided to go to the south again for the long summer break. And on my way back, I called in with Nigel R. at the British Council, who was my boss. And Nigel took one look at me and said, "My God, Donald, you look awful. What is wrong with you?" And I said, "What do you mean? I feel okay." But I had lost a lot of weight. And Nigel immediately spotted it and sent me home to London, to the hospital for tropical diseases. He made me go back to Accra immediately to make the arrangements. I sent a telegram to my mum saying that I was thinking of going home for a visit. I did not say I was sick. Meantime, Mum had written to me to say that my eldest brother was getting married in August. So I saw an opportunity. I replied immediately by telegram, asking her to reply instantly. These are the days of no internet and no WhatsApp or Messenger or anything like that. And I just asked her to reply instantly by telegram so that I could attend the wedding and coincide with my trip home to hospital in London. In those days, there was no fax or messenger or email. I had not spoken to my parents by phone in over a year. Most of the phones were broken and it was far too expensive. I spent almost 2 weeks in London that summer in the hospital for tropical diseases. They did test after test. Eventually they said, "Oh, it's giardiasis." And I said, "What? What's that?" "Oh," he said, "it's quite common. They even have it here in England." I was a little deflated, thinking I had some quite exotic tropical disease. No. The difference is you have a massive dose of it, and it has damaged the absorption by the villi in your intestine. No, okay. I said, "Well, what shall I do?" "Oh, just go to Belfast, stay with your mum, take 12 flagyl after breakfast, and go to bed." This was the same drug I'd been taking in Ghana all year with no effect. They told me to repeat this for 3 days in a row. I did it, and I never looked back. It was great to get some homemade raspberry jam and Mum's cooking. At the end of August, I went back from Belfast to the London hospital for a checkup. I was fine. But just before I left, they announced that a blood test showed that I had subclinical hepatitis. My God, I was devastated. To me, hepatitis was a serious thing. The other volunteers talked about it. The curious thing was that I felt fine. Day after day went by in the hospital, and I still felt fine. I was really anxious to get back to Ghana. I phoned my friend Dillis N., an English doctor who had been in Jarapa but had now left. She told me that in London they were just holding me in order to carry out experimental tests. And she said I should discharge myself if I felt okay. So I did just that. I walked into Voluntary Service Overseas headquarters in London and asked them to book me a ticket to Accra. Now, it is amazing that they believed me. Nowadays, nobody would believe someone if they did this. They would require documents and evidence and all the rest of it. But this is a sign of the times. VSO in London just said, yes, okay, then we'll book you on a ticket back to Accra. And in a few days, I was back in Wa again. Wonderful. When I arrived there, a new volunteer, Rod, had moved in to the old house which I had been sharing with A. I had asked for my own house in the second year, and the headmaster, Mr. S., was happy to oblige me. Rod was not a happy person. He was a bit angry that I had allowed Alphonsus, my friend, my student, to borrow my bicycle over the summer break. So the bicycle was not available for Rod when he arrived a few weeks before I got back. Rod registered his displeasure in no uncertain terms with me. Almost immediately, though, and very sadly, he became sick. And within 12 weeks, Rod was back in England. Officially, it was thyroid trouble, but I never saw much of Rod, and I don't know what the real story was. Phil G., my old buddy from Trinity in Dublin, visited, and I can't remember when exactly, but I don't think he was impressed. I remember that. Phil had been a good friend at TCD, but he had changed and become quite hardened to life, a side of him which I grew to dislike. So, yes, I don't think he really enjoyed his visit to Wa. Now, my other volunteer friend was Louine, and Louine was really something else. She was, I suppose, like many Canadian, Australian females at that time, quite independent. I found her quite difficult to deal with at first. She seemed to me like the stereotypical, cool, assertive, white female who basically terrified me. She made me quake in my boots. I had always found white women to be quite cool and unapproachable. But after a few weeks, a strange thing happened. Determined to forge some sort of relationship with her as the only other white person in the school apart from A, I called on Lou in her bungalow one night, and to my complete surprise, she welcomed me and invited me in. Now, this is the type of surprise which I really like. Anyway, having broken the ice, I was astounded to find her to be really quite personable. We developed a very strong relationship over the next year. It was heaven, in fact. I remember on St. Patrick's Day, 1976, in our second year, we were invited to the Catholic mission by Father Eugene for a beer. We had music, and I drank one bottle of Star beer because there was very little beer in Wa. There were a lot of shortages. Anyway, my constitution was so weak with the giardiasis that I became drunk on this one bottle, and suddenly I felt quite violently ill. I staggered off into the night, I remember it, and found the steps of the chapel, and I threw up. Somehow I found my way back to the car to get a ride home. I don't think the Catholic priest, Father Eugene, who'd invited me and Lou for this, was really impressed with me. I don't think he approved of the friendship either. I noticed that he visited Lou, who was also a Catholic, regularly after that. I don't know, possibly he was trying to warn her about me. In the second year, anyway, Lou started to come to my bungalow for lunch after school. And we chatted and chatted and chatted. And sometimes she didn't leave until mid-afternoon. I felt very emotionally close to her. She was a true soulmate, my first true female soulmate. In spite of our problems, I felt confident in myself and her feelings for me. But she was a woman too, and sadly for both of us, it all ended very badly. A few weeks before we were due to leave Wa permanently, quite unexpectedly, she decided to sleep with the maths teacher. So it all ended in tears. I was glad to leave in the end, but with Lou, John D, and Topher, I was really ready to go anywhere. I couldn't have survived another week, in fact. Years later, I met Mick, the Irish priest, when he was ordained. A few years after that, Mick left the priesthood and married. He was a good-looking fellow. Lou used to say he was wasted as a priest. Some of my trips south to the south coast of Ghana were memorable. I remember getting up at 3 a.m. in the morning from Wa, walking to the Wa bus station, just an hour's walk, in order to queue for a ticket to Kumasi. Then the long ride to Kumasi, the big Setra buses, East German made. Then the trip to Accra. I remember sleeping one night on a bench in the bus station in Kumasi, and then getting up to go to the ticket office at 5 a.m. Although the crush, even at 5 a.m., was indescribable, it was exciting, and the Ghanaians were invariably a delight to be with. I had never even one moment of anxiety my 2 years in Ghana. Towards the end, I began to think of what I would do next. It was amazing. In those days, there was no concern about unemployment. As it happened, Phil G., my friend, talked to his boss at King's Hospital School, Dublin in Ireland, about offering me a job. It was as simple as that. Everything was simple in those days. So when I got home in 1977, I already had a job.